Tonight we're going to talk about time, and we all have wondered why we don't have more of it and how we can get more of it. I've been thinking a lot about time. Tonight my eldest child has her senior prom. So after I got off the news, I rushed to a pre-prom party. I didn't know that such a thing existed. Took some photos with her and saw this girl this young woman, this woman, she's 18, who to me will always be this, little 6-pound, 12-ounce baby that just seems like yesterday was born, and now she's off and ready to go to college after she graduates next week. And we all wonder where the time goes, but more importantly, why we can't have more of it. I especially feel that because I also have a 22-month-old, and so when you do the actuarial tables, I'm a baby boomer, and on the early part of the baby boomer, I worry about this. And so I wonder why we can't have more of it. Why should our time on Earth be, on average, 80 years, which is roughly how long you can expect if you're lucky to have been born in a developed nation? Life expectancy is, though, the longest it's ever been. In fact, it's doubled of what it was in 1990. Some people beat that actuarial time. I'm hoping to, because I want to see my new daughter graduate college. For instance, a woman named Jeanne Calment, a French woman. There she is. She holds the record that we know of for the longest life. She lived 122 years and 4 months, I guess give or take a few days or a couple of weeks, but it's pretty phenomenal. She was born a year before Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone and lived long enough to hear about Dolly, the cloned sheep. She's seen a lot of history. So, is this the outer limit of life, 122 years? My father used to say, I'm going to live to be 120, and I think he believed it until the day he died, a day after his 81st birthday. I think he believed that in his mind. He believed it, and so he lived like that. But why should this be the outer limit? Why can't we all live to 120 or 220 or 420, or as one of our panelists are going to say tonight, 1,020? 1,020. Do we want to do that? Can we cure aging the way smallpox was cured, or polio? Do we want to do it? Is that the way we should go? These are some of the questions we're examining tonight in what I think is going to be a wonderfully stimulating and exciting panel discussion. Here are a few more questions we're looking at. Pretty heavy stuff. Pretty heavy stuff. There may be those of you who think, if you think, we're going to talk tonight about, should we exercise? I'll tell you, the answer is yes. Should we eat more blueberries instead of fatty beef? The answer is yes. And we all want to know that kind of stuff. Should we stay out of the sun without sunscreen on? Absolutely. But we're going to really dig deep a little bit tonight with some very smart people and look at some of the bigger questions. So I hope I've answered the more consumer questions. Exercise, don't eat fatty foods, stay out of the sun between 10 and 4 without sunscreen. And that's the extent of sort of my knowledge about this. I don't usually like to interview people with notes, but I'm here, and our guests are up here. They talk right about here, though. And I think it's going to be an exciting panel. So I want to, with no further ado, introduce the really cool, smart panel of scientists that we've assembled. First off, Dr. Leonard Garante is a molecular biologist at MIT. He's also the director of the Glenn Laboratory for the Science of Aging. Lenny has made great strides in gerontology when he discovered a gene that regulates lifespan in both yeast and worms. The field of gerontology has been referred to as having two parts, pre-Rose and post-Rose, a reference to our next panelist, Dr. Michael Rose, who made scientific history by manipulating the lifespan of fruit flies. He's a professor of biology at the University of California, Irvine, and director of its Network for Experimental Research on Evolution. Dr. Michael Rose. Michael. Dr. Aubrey de Grey is a biomedical gerontologist and chief science officer of the SENS Foundation, which is dedicated to combating the aging process. Aubrey has made the controversial claim that the first human who will live 1,000 years may already be alive. My daughter hopes it's me. And finally, Dr. Judith Campisi is a cell biologist at the Buck Institute for Age Research, the first independent research facility in the U.S. focused solely on the connection between aging and chronic disease. She's also a senior scientist at the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. Ladies and gentlemen, your panel for tonight. I've already answered the question about exercise and blueberries and fatty beef, so we can move on to that. But if you want to weigh in on that, I'm sure you'd all probably not disagree. Let me start with a question that to us seems kind of simple. To me it does anyway, but it's sort of the basis of your work, and so it's more complicated than the simple way I look at it. Do we have to age? Do we have to get old? And of course my children would say yes, but this is what you spend your life analyzing and sort of, can I say, fighting against? How would you respond to that if my child says, do we have to get old? Lenny, we'll start with you.
Well, I mean, I think that I would take the view that where we are right now, at this point in time, I believe we do have to get old. Now, that said, I think that we're gaining a toehold into the problem, and we will be able to slow aging down. I don't think it's fixed. I don't think it's hardwired, but I think it's a formidable challenge to do something about it. And it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of effort and a lot of good science. But I think from what we've seen in the laboratory that we will certainly be able to do something about aging. I'm not saying we can stop it, but I think it is possible to slow it.
Again, Michael, to say this just seems so counterintuitive, but it's what you guys specialize in. Is death inevitable?
Well, you have to differentiate between death and aging. I think some process of aging is inevitable for animals like ourselves. It's not true of all animals, which is very important. And my opinion is that aging ultimately stops if you live long enough, which we can talk more about.
Aging stops if you live long enough. I told you it's going to be a fascinating panel. Aubrey?
Yeah, so the way I like to start thinking about this question is by taking into account the fact that the human body is ultimately a machine. It's a really, really complicated machine, of course, and unlike man-made machines, we don't have the plans, but still, it's a machine, which means that there's no intrinsic reason that I can see why we should not be able to develop technology that postpones the functional decline of that machine in the same way that we already successfully do for simple man-made machines. So I basically, from a different starting point, come to the same conclusion that you've already heard, that at this point, yes, we don't know how to stop aging from being inevitable, but we have at least the beginnings of a roadmap towards creating medicines that may be able to make aging a thing of the past.
So if you think we're like machines, Aubrey thinks we're like machines, that we can just sort of retool, maybe change the carburetor and add some new pistons. Is that the way it works, Judy?
Well, let me start by saying we're going to die. Everybody's going to die. So the question is, how are you going to die? What are you going to die from? So if you live long enough, eventually you'll fall and break your neck, or you'll have some catastrophe. And so death is really inevitable. The question is, how are you going to die? And I think the more interesting question is, at what point do we have the aging process so manifest that we recognize it as aging? And I would say that we've already postponed aging. Just think about what's happened in your lifespan and what was considered old when you were a teenager and what's considered old now. We've already done it. The question is, what's the limit? Is there a limit, and what is that limit?
And it's more than just a question of getting mature, because my kids would say that I'm old. And I would have said I'm old when I was their age, but you're saying it's qualitatively different than
When
that.
you were a young boy, a woman of 50 was an old woman. That's not true anymore.
We have the audience
I'm
responding.
49.
I should say, and it's sometimes subtle and sometimes not, but the four panelists disagree with each other. You have done this before, correct? Together, talk on a panel like this?
Not this
Not
very
this-
Various
no,
forms?
no,
Not
not
this combination, but each of you have talked and had panels with other people, correct? Sure. And so in their own way, they're all controversial and all have disagreements. So we're going to get to that. I'm going to focus on each person for a little bit, and then we'll sort of mix it up enough. It's not a wrestling match, but there is disagreement, and it's fascinating. I think we're going to learn something. Let me start with Lenny. Well, what's happened? Why is it that in a generation, really, this study of gerontology and aging and these questions is so hugely popular now? What's changed?
Well, I think the science of aging has really gotten very exciting in the past 20, 30 years. And there have been a number of experimental breakthroughs in the laboratory. And what labs have done, there have been various strategies, and we've all taken different strategies at this problem. So our strategy was to try and find genes that would have a special effect on the aging process. So are there a handful of genes that if we manipulated them, we could affect the lifespan and the aging of an organism? Now, we started this work about 20 years ago with a system of yeast. So it sounds ridiculous to study yeast, but scientists do study yeast in the laboratory. They're live cells, they grow, and they get old. And we studied them because they're easy to manipulate experimentally. And we found a gene that can make yeast cells live longer, and it took better part of a decade to do that. That was the hard part. And my feeling was this is great for yeast, but there's no generality in this. But we think now that this gene, and these genes are called sirtuins, are very general in nature, and that they are there to make us live longer in times of stress or food scarcity, like calorie restriction. That's why they're there in nature. And we have an opportunity now to tap into these genes. If we can understand exactly how they work, we can develop drugs that can elicit the benefits of the sirtuins. And I think those will extend healthy lifespan and probably maximum lifespan to some extent. And many in the audience have probably heard that red wine is good for you. You've probably heard that. And one of the reasons is it contains a natural product, a chemical that's called resveratrol.
They sell it at the health food store, little pills.
You can get it. I don't know what you're getting when you buy a nutraceutical at a health food store. But in the laboratory, this pure chemical will activate one of the sirtuins, and it will have health benefits on, for example, a mouse. So I think that the research started in a very, very strange organism. Yeast has, through just good luck, I guess, opened up a door that's led us to at least one path. And I think that this is not the only path. There are going to be a lot of paths, but one path to develop drugs that can improve our health and, I think, slow down aging and diseases of aging.
Resveratrol does not work in yeast, though. It doesn't expand the life of yeast, I don't think. Right? You pour red wine on yeast, it's going to last longer. I don't think that works.
Nobody's added red wine to
But already you've said two things that are sort of consumer-oriented. Then I said we were going to be beyond. But one, you said calorie restriction.
Yes.
That this is a natural thing, you said, in...
Yes, calorie restriction has been observed in the laboratory for about 80 years now. And it's done in rodents, and you can restrict their eating, so you can either you can feed them every other day, would be one way to do it, and cut their calories roughly to about 60% of what they would eat normally, and they live longer.
But they're crankier, I bet.
Well, they may well be.
They're in a very bad mood.
It's not that easy to measure crankiness. But I'll tell you one thing.
At my office, it is.
They look younger, too.
It's interesting.
As they get older. And furthermore, if you look at the diseases that the rodents normally get or that you can make them get in the laboratory, they're protected against those diseases. So that, to me, is the opportunity here.
When you came out with your resveratrol study, I do not drink until the study came out, and it just seemed compelling to me that I should have a glass of red wine or two on the weekends. And so I just started. I don't know if it's helping or not, but I'm one of the people, and I'm sure there are people in the audience who see that study and say, okay, I'll do it. Okay, here's another vitamin that say works. Take selenium. It'll be good for whatever. People grab on to these things. Is there evidence that it works? You don't drink red wine, right? You don't take resveratrol.
Actually, I do both.
Oh, you do both. Okay. So it must be
To be safe.
Yeah, to be safe.
No, but the problem with the red wine is it has very low quantity.
So you'd have to drink a lot of it.
You'd have to drink a real lot.
All right, I'm gonna.
But Lenny,
no more wine.
Lenny, what
Wine
about
sales, by the way. Did you
mouse
see that?
studies,
Yes.
right? What about the mouse studies? So it didn't extend lifespan in mice.
So what it does in mice is if you take mice that are fed what's called the high-fat diet, they get a disease that's much like diabetes in people. And if you give those mice, if you also dose them with resveratrol, it protects them against the disease. So again, and the life we live and the diets we eat, I think, it exposes us to things like diabetes and prediabetes syndromes. So I think that's why I take it. I think, human trials on resveratrol show that it's safe, but there's no evidence in people that it's efficacious, no scientific evidence.
And yet we grab onto these things.
Well, but see, the thing is there are new drugs coming down the pike now that are based on this concept that have not been that are much more potent than resveratrol in rodents and haven't been tested yet in humans. And there are at least 8 clinical trials ongoing now with these new compounds against diseases like diabetes. And so I think we will know whether these compounds have the potential to deliver health benefits in combating diseases of aging. I'm not saying that we know right now, but I'm saying that the studies are in progress now that will give us the answer.
How do you boost sirtuin? Is that what you call it? How do you boost these sirtuin levels? If this is the longevity gene, how do we get them? Can we go out and buy them tomorrow?
Well, I don't think it's the only longevity gene, but what happens in nature, we think, is that low food supply or calorie restriction is what naturally boosts the activity of these genes. So we could ourselves probably do this by eating every other day. And
Cranky office mates, right?
And a friend of mine said, well, gee, I don't know if calorie restriction will actually work in humans, but it would sure seem like it did.
Well, we would be younger looking as we get older, but I can't imagine that especially in America, especially in this culture, or any culture, that they would give up half the calories.
No, people who do it are miserable.
But they live a long time. Sounds like a Woody Allen line, doesn't it? He lived a long time, but he was miserably happy. Is there a way to get a drug to do this?
Yes, that's the whole point.
I mean, that's
that if you can get a drug to do it that can activate the sirtuins, much like low calories in the diet will activate them, then, no pun intended, you can have your cake and eat it too.
There you go. How long before that happens? Because I know half the people here want to go out and buy it right now.
I know. I think that for resveratrol, you can buy it. I think I would do some online research of where you get it and evidence that it actually is what it claims to be. For the newer drugs, the more potent drugs, they're new compounds that have never been in people, so they have to go through the full range of FDA testing, and that's going to take a matter of years. But I would optimistically think that we'll see something like this in 5 to 10 years.
And Aubrey thinks we have hundreds, so that's good news. All right, thank you, Lenny. Move on to Judy. I want to talk about your work. You approach the topic of aging through the pathology of cancer. Why is that?
So if you think about most of the diseases of aging, what happens is things fall apart. So we call this degeneration. So your eyes don't work as well, your heart doesn't work as well, your muscles don't work as well. That's degenerative pathology. And cancer is a very different kind of age-related disease. So cancer is what we call a gain-of-function disease. So in order for a cancer cell to kill you, that cell has to acquire new capabilities, new functions. That's not degeneration. So the question we asked is it an accident that with age, degeneration goes up, and with age, cancer goes up? Or is there a common biology that links those two processes? Because if there's a common biology, then we have a handle on a basic aging process that could drive the whole aging process, which is what sets us up to be vulnerable to all of these diseases. So that's why we started studying cancer. And the short answer is we think that there is a common process that drives the gain-of-function disease, cancer, and drives the degenerative diseases, neurodegeneration, weak muscles, your eyes not working as well. And we're intensely interested in understanding not only how that process works, but of course, what we can do to slow it down or to stop it from having these deleterious effects.
So you say, unless we can stop cancer first,
If we could really stop cancer, I'd say...
You haven't done a very good job yet, right?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think the hard nut that we're going to face, the hard wall we're going to face in extending human longevity is going to be cancer. That's a very, very tough disease. Because think about it. What causes cancer? Mutations. What causes mutations? Cell division. Major source of mutations that drive cancer. So we have on the horizon potential therapies to treat degeneration, stem cell research. We've all heard about the miracles of what stem cells can do. We are not there yet, but in theory, we can put those cells in, they can proliferate and make new neurons or new muscle. But that cell division process puts that stem cell in danger of becoming cancerous. So the way we look at it, this is a very central part of the aging process in complex organisms like mice and humans. And we have to understand it, and we have to understand how to slow it down or stop it. I'm not so sure we'll ever stop it, but maybe slow it down or have its incidence very much decreased. Otherwise, I don't think we're going to see real substantial benefits to longevity.
You said something fascinating, because people say, pinning a lot of hopes on stem cell research. But if
Yes.
those stem cells are subjected to the same cell division and mutations...
That's right.
then-
Every stem cell is a potential cancer cell.
See, this is just a shocking thing to me, because my newest child, we got their, cord blood and put it away, and so you're trying everything
And
to
of
look to the
course,
future.
if the choice is living the last 20 years of your life with sarcopenia, weak muscles, or neurodegeneration, your brain's not working, and stem cells can do something about that, and then you die in the last year of life of cancer. Maybe that's an acceptable trade-off. I don't know. But really, the challenge is going to be, for all stem cell therapy, is going to be keeping those cells from turning cancerous. It's a big, big challenge.
Do you think I want to ask this again, because if we can't cure cancer, using your theory, if we can't
There
really...
are some cancers are curable. So childhood leukemias, testicular cancer in young men, these cancers went from 90% fatal to 90% curable. Cures. No cancer 20, 30 years out. The problem is the drugs that we use to treat those cancers accelerate aging. So we're seeing this now in the clinic. Young people who were treated with some of these drugs are developing some age-related pathologies 10 or 20 years ahead of time. And so we really need better ways of dealing with cancer, because we pay a price for it. And the older we get, of course, the more vulnerable we are to these types of drugs.
Right, and they get
so there's lots of things on the horizon. I don't mean to sound too depressing about it. New cancer drugs are being developed that are not so toxic, that are targeted to the cancer cell. But the problem is, every time a cell divides, your skin, your gut, your eyes, you're having cell division going on all the time. Every cell division is a risk for developing a new cancer. So this is tough. This is going to be a tough problem.
Is it possible to develop this so that we don't, young people especially, age these young people, they get old while they're being cured of cancer?
Is it possible?
Is it possible? Yeah, we're looking for ways to treat people with cancer without increasing the aging process.
Exactly. It might be possible, yes, with some of the therapies that are targeted against very specific genes that are mutated in very specific cancers. The problem with cancer is it's 100 different types of diseases, and even if Lenny and you had the same prostate cancer, your prostate cancers are different. And this is the big challenge. This is the revolution of genomics that's going to allow us to say why this cancer of the same tissue is different from this cancer. And hopefully there will be new drugs to target those specific cancers. Again, though, the problem is all of those new cells that are being made every single day poses a risk for developing a new cancer. That's the challenge.
And it's a challenge you guys work with every day, which is fascinating. You go into work knowing that the odds are stacked against you and sort of hoping for
At least, you know, as humans, we make it through, on average, more than 50 years without getting cancer. So the body is pretty good. Not perfect, but it's pretty good at keeping cancer at bay. But we need to learn how to make it better.
We do indeed, and we're going to get some answers tonight, I hope. Michael Rose, we talked about the post-Rose and pre-Rose. You're post-Rose, I guess, sitting here today. I hope you still are post-Rose. You have a new book out called Does Aging Stop? So this simple question again, it's complicated to you. Does it stop? Or are we always going to age as we grow older?
The evidence that aging stops in experimental animals in labs is getting better all the time, and it's also very good in humans. In fact, humans are the first organism where the cessation of aging was shown. It was shown in an obscure paper published in an awkward year, 1939. And there's plenty more data now, much better data than was available in 1939. And in particular, spectacular data were published in the 1990s showing the cessation of aging at late ages.
You are, I guess, viewed as a controversial character because you approach the puzzle of aging from a very different viewpoint than most of your colleagues. It's not about our genes, but it's about more the evolution of our species. Is that the proper way to define it?
No, evolution and genes work hand in hand. I mean, evolution works because of genes. Absent genes, there's no evolution. So the way modern biologists understand evolution is in terms of a process of genetic change, changes in gene frequencies.
Explain what that means, because when I was briefed on all this and read all your researches, not all of them, but tried to read the Cliff Notes versions of them, molecular biology sort of was one thing, and then evolutionary biology was another, and that's where you fall into it.
That's correct. I'm an evolutionary biologist. If I could have my first visual. This is a sea anemone. Some sea anemones never age. They show no increase in their risk of dying as a function of their age at all. And to an evolutionary biologist, it's a perfect illustration that the ultimate controller of aging is evolution. And that's what I've spent the last 35 years studying, is exactly how evolution tunes aging.
Let's talk about fruit flies. The research has been called the Career Women Experiment. Is that right?
Yes. That's a journalistic gloss on what I do. So an experiment I'm notorious for is...
Guilty.
I like to think of it sometimes as a graduate school experiment. Basically, normally flies in a lab are reproduced in very quick cycles. So what journalists would call trailer park trash, you know, your grandmother when you're 36 years old. So what I did was I set up, first in the 1970s, populations in which the organisms, the flies in question would have all the sex they wanted, so that's sort of like graduate school and medical school, but any reproduction they did was all their eggs were discarded until they reached a sufficiently late age, which you can think of if you're an academic like tenure, or a physician, you had your medical practice, you finished residency. If you're a journalist, you finally got that job hosting television news shows, something like that. And then we take the offspring to start the next generation, and we do
call
a
that
generation.
Regis.
Yeah. We do it generation after generation after generation, and the population evolves as evolutionary theory suggests it should, evolves longer and longer lifespans. And just last year we published our first paper on how that happens genome-wide, and it happens by changing not just one or two genes, but by changing hundreds of genes, that being how evolution normally operates.
But you do that organically or artificially?
organic, artificial. In the lab, those two things converge. So, but it is an experiment you can do with your descendants. So you 80 generations from now, if your descendants all refrain from reproducing until they're 40 or 45 years of age, then eventually they will evolve to live longer.
I could be an experiment in your lab, is what that means. Having a baby at 59 is, it means, now you're saying that if you isolate the older fruit flies and only reproduce the offspring of the older fruit flies, they will have longer lives, is what you're saying.
Evolutionarily, that means over many generations. It will happen, yes. It's just like how racehorses are bred, basically. If only the winning horse gets to breed, then you get faster and faster horses.
But this does not solve the question, how do we make this happen right now? You're talking about 80 generations, which...
Well, in science, we do this thing where we try to understand what's really going on, and once we understand what's really going on, then we can do big things in the practical world. E equals mc squared explains how the sun works. In 1945, physicists showed the world how they could make very big explosions using E equals mc squared. But first you have to have Einstein's 1905 E equals mc squared before you get atomic power plants, atomic bombs, and so on. In the same way, my point of view is, if you are going to radically transform the aging process, you better do so using the correct science, not incorrect science.
Right, but what does that mean for humans in terms of, can we put a timeline on this? For getting to, let's say, where Aubrey's going to talk about having someone to live a couple hundred years.
Well, Aubrey and I have previously on other panels disagreed about how we don't disagree on the idea that we can enormously transform the aging process. I mean, I do that for a living. For the last 35 years, I get paid because I can produce much longer lived organisms and analyze how that happens genetically and physiologically. So I know it's a reality because I make it happen in my lab. And Aubrey and I, for years, in my case, first in 1984, I said in New Scientist, we could do this for people. Here's one strategy. Aubrey has his strategy. My opinion is that the strategies that I've now proposed 3 in public, will work better than Aubrey's strategy. And of course, Aubrey disagrees with that.
Yeah.
So,
but it's kept civil, right? Been kept civil.
Yeah, there's no screaming, but I'm a Canadian. So
What?
A recovering Canadian.
Recovering Canadian. I'm still a Canadian.
Is there common ground between the molecular biologists and the evolutionary biologists?
Well, the genomics show, the genomics show that there's tons of molecular biology involved. There's no question, it's all molecular biology. The real difference of opinion is how complicated is that molecular biology. That's where you do have a salient difference. In my world, it's very complex. That doesn't mean it's impossible to resolve, because now in this century, we have genomic tools which are spectacularly powerful. So the genomic complexity of aging doesn't scare genomicists.
Okay. Aubrey, we're going to go to you. Besides not shaving, what's the secret here?
Yeah, the not shaving does help, because if I did shave my beard off, my wife would kill me.
Okay, there you
would
go.
Definitely defeat the object.
I told you these guys were smart. How do you disagree with Michael?
Well, it's great good fortune for me to be speaking last, because really I think it's going to be possible for me to emphasize how I broadly agree with everyone else on the panel, and only in a subtle way have a difference of emphasis. But certainly the conclusions that I come to in terms of the time frames within which we have a respectable chance of making a very substantial difference to the age at which functional decline sets in and ill health sets in, and of course mortality follows. Those conclusions are very different, very much more dramatic, I guess, than what most of my colleagues feel. If we could have the first visual that I had, I forget which order I had them two in, the graphs. No, the other one. Put the other one up first. The graphs? Can we have the graphs? There we go. All right, so this is my understanding of what Michael is saying we might be able to do in terms of combating aging. Michael has observed that over a large proportion of the natural lifespan of his fruit flies, and indeed of humans and so on, there is an increase in the risk of death, And then that increase appears, from a statistical point of view anyway, essentially to cease. So you get a flat line. That's where what I've labeled normal aging. And what I believe Michael hopes to be able to do in the future is to slow aging down, as indicated by the blue or the red lines, but to have this cessation of aging kick in at pretty much the same chronological age as it would before aging was slowed down.
Nope.
Well, I must have just not listened hard enough to your talks in the past. Now, I think that's possible. I think that might happen. However, I also think it might happen that what we see is what we see in the red line, where, in fact, the risk of death continues to rise until most of the individuals of the original population are dead, same as we see in normal aging. Now, this is an evolutionary way of looking at the problem and of potential solutions, and I like that. I think that evolution, it was originally Theodosius Dobzhansky who said that nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution, and I think that's very true. However, we also benefit a great deal from mechanistic analyses of aging, as has been indicated by Lenny and Judy. And so if we go to the other visual that I had, the network, this is the problem that we're facing. Our bodies are really rather complicated. This is a simplified diagram of a very small subset of what we know about how our bodies work. And that's bad enough. But of course, the really bad news is, and I'm sure all of us here on the panel agree with this, that this is a simplified diagram of a small subset of what we know about how metabolism works, which is utterly dwarfed by the astronomical amount that we don't know about how metabolism works, even ignoring all the stuff that we don't even yet know that we don't know. So the question then is, how on earth could we possibly do anything about this? And Judy's touched on what I very much agree is possibly the most challenging aspect of this, namely the yin-yang between, on the one hand, degenerative aspects of aging, and on the other hand, the gain-of-function phenomenon that is cancer. I think that if we did have a magic, complete cure for cancer, then a lot of, in fact, most of the other problems of aging would become very much easier to solve than they are in the context of cancer. Various people are working on really, really impressive cures for cancer. I've proposed one, which almost everybody thinks is completely balmy, but it might work. But there are others out there, especially involving using the immune system against cancer in creative new ways. So, it's not out of the question that would happen. But at the moment, we haven't got that, and we don't know how long it's going to be. Now, what Lenny's been working on for a long time, and indeed many other people for, as he mentioned, the past 80 years since the concept was discovered of animals living longer when you don't feed them as much as they would like, is what appears ostensibly to be an exception to what I'm saying here, a very simple intervention that appears to have a globally beneficial effect on this chaotic, extraordinarily complicated network of processes. And I've got to say that I wish I were more optimistic about this, but it seems to me that there's a hard wall that we're not going to be able to exceed in terms of our ability to postpone age-related ill health using simple mechanisms like this. Because the only reason they work at all is because they're already programmed into the system. There's some way of tweaking the system, a switch that one can flip that actually turns on a whole bunch of machinery that has been evolved to respond to that switch, such as famine, for example. And therefore, you're not going to be able to exceed what that machinery has been designed to do, whether it's by using an environmental intervention like famine or a pharmacological or a genetic one. This is my pessimistic scenario, but I could be wrong. And so, of course, just as with Michael and Judy, I'm delighted that Lenny and many other people are exploring this. However, what this has led me to feel is that actually the most optimistic, the most promising scenario for postponing age-related ill health in the foreseeable future is to use a repair and maintenance strategy. Very much the same way that, as I mentioned in response to your first question to me, we already successfully extend the functioning lifespan of simple man-made machines. periodic repair and maintenance. I think that regenerative medicine, because that's what I'm talking about, applied to the human body, has a chance within the next few decades of becoming sufficiently comprehensive that it can actually work against something as complicated as aging. It will involve a very big divide and conquer approach, doing many different things, many different molecular and cellular repairs to the body all at the same time. There'll be, of course, regenerative medicine as we understand it today, with stem cells and with tissue engineering and so on. And there'll also be molecular regenerative medicine, cleaning out the garbage inside cells or in the spaces between cells, things like that. It's going to be really complicated, but I think it's got a better chance. And here's the really good news. It's got a chance for people who are already in middle age or older by the time the therapies are developed. And that's why I've been able to come to the conclusion that people already alive today have a respectable chance of benefiting from these technologies.
Aren't we already doing that to some degree? You have a hip replacement, you have a knee replacement. We replace parts all the time, much like a car, right? So you're saying just expand it exponentially.
Pretty much, and also, of course, extend it into the biological realm to a greater extent. So many of the things that we do today are what we might call non-biological solutions to medical problems. Hip replacement, a bit of titanium or whatever. Stem cell therapy is, of course, a biological solution. I expect that a wider range of biological solutions to the accumulating damage of aging are going to be forthcoming.
Because otherwise we become robots if we're just replacing with titanium, right? But what are those regenerative pills? What are we talking about?
Well, first of all, not pills.
Huh?
Cells.
Cells.
So stem cell
But
therapy.
we're talking about eventually giving them out in pill form, right? Isn't that what you suggested before?
Not necessarily, no. I mean, stem cell therapies today, by and large, mostly, are administered using injections. You inject cells that have got the right properties into the circulation, they go to the right place, they do their thing. There's no intrinsic reason why that should change when we apply stem cell therapies as part of a wider panel of interventions. Sometimes you apply stem cells in different ways. Sometimes you want to, for example, inject them into a particular part of the brain. That's already being done to address Parkinson's disease in clinical trials. And there's a long way to go to make those clinical trials really work, but there's promising results already.
If your method is successful and you take a 61-year-old moderator of the panel and give him this genetic manipulation and it works, what happens to me?
Well,
do I stay 61 forever?
Oh, no. The whole point of this is just as if you take a middle-aged car and you give it a really thorough going over, it becomes functionally a younger car. So similarly, here we would be talking about bona fide rejuvenation, putting people into a situation which was biologically younger than they were before the therapies were applied. And that's why the periodic application of this sort of therapy has the possibility to give very dramatic increases in postponement of age-related ill health and therefore extension of healthy lifespan.
So can I say something about this?
Yes, of course.
Because I'm not disagreeing with Aubrey, because I also am optimistic about stem cell therapy. But here's a big problem that we face, and it's a big gap in our knowledge. You can take a good young cell and put it in an old body, and the cell remains young, but it doesn't behave. Right. And it's because there is something about the aged organism that inhibits that young cell from expressing its youthful characteristics. And we do not know what those processes are. At least we don't know them in enough detail to begin to cogently try to fix that problem.
But that's what Aubrey's basing his
Julie's absolutely right. Julie's absolutely right. And this, again, can be borne out by the analogy with simple man-made machines. So there's a certain level of periodic maintenance that one is required to do to one's car by law, and one does it every year or whatever, but it's not good enough to make the car last significantly beyond its warranty period, so to speak. Whereas people who keep vintage cars going, or indeed 50-year-old VW Bugs or whatever, do so by doing more comprehensive maintenance than that, and thereby getting a very substantial increase in functioning lifespan. So it's all about comprehensiveness. We have to be able to address not only isolated types of damage, like, for example, loss of cells that might be addressed by using stem cells. We have to address all the various types of damage, molecular and cellular, that accumulate in the body, and we have to do them all at the same time, or we won't get a significant benefit.
Bob,
Yeah, I mean, I could chime in. And so first of all, like the spirit of what Aubrey is saying, I very much agree with. And furthermore, I think evolutionarily, organisms evolve to avoid predation, and aging is our predator. And so it's not even if we figured out how to solve aging, it wouldn't be anything out of the ordinary evolutionarily. That's how things work in life. Where I differ is, first of all, as a molecular biologist and a scientist, I do tend to take a not pessimistic but critical view of things. And if something has never been done before, I don't say it can't be done, but I say you can't assume that it can be done. You certainly can't assume a time frame over which it can be done. So I think that the strategies that Aubrey is outlining to basically repair damage, to put it in a nutshell, is not how, as a scientist, I would go about the problem. If my goal were, and by the way, I agree also with what Aubrey said about calorie restriction. I think what we're doing is we're leveraging something that's already evolved. And I think that makes, but I tend to have to take the opposite spin. I think that makes a great deal of sense because it's there, we should take it. And,
sure, it certainly means that it's going to be very much easier to do what you're trying to do than what I'm trying to do.
You have a chance
So I definitely regard the manipulation and exploitation of the phenomenon of calorie restriction, using drugs or whatever, as essentially a bridge to the sort of much more ambitious but possibly much more effective work.
So the calorie-restricted rodents do age and they do die. It's just slower and it takes longer. But I would, as a scientist, I would begin to think about, Michael showed the sea creature that doesn't age. Maybe we should start to try to understand organisms that don't show any aging. And how do they do it?
And one of the things they have in common, Lenny, is they don't get cancer. I mean, this is a recurring theme. Those those outliers, even naked mole rats who do age and die, but have enormous lifespans, they don't get cancer.
No, I agree. I agree. Cancer is an issue. The other thing I think about is if you think of our species, okay, we reproduce, and our children reproduce, and so on and so on and so on. And that means that every newborn has to be born the same age, and that is age 0. And that means that the germ cells that gave rise to that newborn, the sperm and the egg, cannot have undergone any aging at all. So that when you form that new embryo, it's purged of any of the detritus of aging. And so I think that there's a place to look then is in the germ cells to see, are there mechanisms that germ cells use? Oocytes have to they exist at birth, and they have to sit around until sexual maturity. That's 20, 30 years. Are there mechanisms there that, again, evolved? And so we're, again, leveraging mechanisms that evolved. And in the case of the oocyte, of course, there you're really stopping aging. Because even if you had a tiny bit of aging every generation, the species would senesce. So again, as a scientist, I sort of look for what can we take advantage of that's there, that takes the problem and cuts it down to size. Whereas, in fact, Aubrey himself, in that complex diagram.
That wasn't so complex. The metabolism thing? The subway map.
Can I ask you a question about it?
No. You won't get an answer.
So my concern is it's so complex that it's impossible. I can't even think about it, let alone put a time frame on it.
There's always a tension here between science and technology. Science is driven by the quest to find things out really for the sake of finding things out. And of course,
it's for the sake of doing no harm.
Well, sure, no, I'll come to that. But science is all about finding things out, and then technology takes what we know and says, okay, how can we use this for the greater good? Now,
and technology does that best when it's based on the correct science.
Sure, that's right.
And my view is that a lot of what the three of you think about the science of aging is in fact scientifically incorrect.
However, what's also important to remember is that sometimes one can get wound up in trying to find out more and more without realizing that one may already know enough. So I don't think that it's possible at all to specify confident timeframes for the development of any technology that is more than a few years away, and that certainly applies here. I I'm often pressed on time frames for the development of comprehensive regenerative medicine against aging. And I think that we have a 50-50 chance of achieving it within the next 25 or 30 years. But I certainly think that we have at least a 10% chance of not achieving it within 100 years. So that probably puts a good idea.
And so what happens to the person who's already alive that may be the first person to live 1,000 years?
I say, they may be or they may not be. I don't know whether that's going to happen.
So
going on a
I
limb.
want to know what's wrong with the way we're thinking.
I don't think there's anything wrong.
Can I have
I don't want to know what's right.
Can I have my third?
I want to know what's wrong.
I have my third image. My third image from the AV people.
Oh, Judy, you set him up.
They've rehearsed this.
That's the fourth.
I didn't.
Oh.
That's Galileo in front of the Inquisition.
Yeah.
And this is what was at the core. At the top, you have, I believe, the geocentric model, which everybody believed for a very good reason, which is when we stand on the Earth, we see the sun move across the sky. Below, you have the heliocentric model for the solar system, where the sun is in the center, and it only looks like it rises in the morning, crosses the sky, and sets in the evening because of relative motion.
Yeah, I believe in Galileo.
Cool. So what modern science illustrates is the point that what is intuitively obviously wrong might in fact be scientifically correct. So it is my thesis that in fact the entire way that Aubrey characterizes the aging process is incorrect, that it's not a cumulative, endless process of deterioration and damage, that is instead the retuning of health and function because of Hamilton's forces of natural selection, which you can go now back to my second image. There we are. So this is a crude cartoon for what I call the weakness of natural selection. This is a result that's a direct corollary of evolutionary genetic theory. It's very, very powerful mathematical theory, the kind that most biologists don't like. And what it shows is that once reproduction starts in a population, that the force of natural selection becomes more and more weak. But finally an age is reached at which that is no longer the case, and the weakness of natural selection plateaus. And if I could have shown the data on the plateauing of aging, that in fact predicts, in a theoretical manner, not only the aging process, but the fact that it comes to a stop. And in my lab, we have shown that we can retune this function and change the age at which aging stops. And that is, in fact, my proposal, Aubrey, not the one you presented, which is just the slow aging. Slowing aging was what I did for the first 20 years of my career. Mm-hmm. For the last 15 years, I've been working on changing the age at which aging stops.
Can you significantly increase in particular, the proportion of the original population that are still alive at the point that aging stops?
And that is exactly what we're doing in our present experiments.
You mean you haven't done it yet?
No, we actually have done it. Yeah.
I'll be looking forward to seeing that manuscript.
I'm going to send it to your journal.
So Michael, if you're a human,
yes,
and you live to be 123, and at that point, aging will have, by your criteria, will have stopped for some period of time.
Yes.
That's not life. That's not what we want.
Exactly. And in fact, that's the point. If you stop it earlier, when you're in vastly better condition.
Yeah.
So the project we're working on is the project of stopping human aging when people are in their 60s.
But how do you do that, Michael?
And that's going to be in the paper I'm going to submit to Aubrey's journal.
What's the concept?
But you said it would take up to 80 generations for that to be complete.
No. Different strategy now. We're working on a different strategy, which involves strictly environmental change.
Got it.
This is in our book coming out next week, Does Aging Stop? It's also on a website.
Come on, tell us.
Our fifth graph.
55theses.org. You can find it by using Michael Rose and 55 as your search string. And basically it involves a lifestyle change.
Oh, yeah?
And with the
Can you give
lifestyle
us
change.
an advanced hint tonight, a little more?
Basically taking advantage of your evolutionary history, which varies with each person. Specifically, the people who can use the strategy that I propose on the website best are the people who don't have any agricultural ancestry. So people who are right from the jungles of Brazil, The evolutionary theory suggests it will work great for them. Those are real people too, don't laugh. They have a right to
Or people who live in
long,
high-rise
healthy-
apartments,
healthy lives.
also.
Yeah.
Maybe like the jungles of Brazil, depends on the city. It will work less well for people like the ones assembled on the stage right now because of our agricultural ancestry, but the evolutionary theory and experiments suggest it will have some efficacy for stopping when you age earlier.
So
which
what is this lifestyle change?
Well, the lifestyle change involves, as you go forward in chronological time, going backward in evolutionary time in terms of the lifestyle that your ancestors had. A jargony, trendy American term for this is going paleo. Now, an interesting corollary of the evolutionary theory is this doesn't work for people under 30 or 40. It only works when you're older because you've gone far enough in chronological time, so you've lost adaptation to agriculture.
You know, traditionally, most of us were starving.
Actually, that's not true anthropologically.
It is.
No. The data are pretty clear that prior to the advent of agriculture, the lifestyle of the hunter-gatherers was much more lavish, actually, than the early agricultural members of agricultural civilization was. In fact, there was
They
a
would
cute
boom
little
and bust
experiment.
all the time, and there was a lot of nutritional imbalance. You know, you'd kill a deer and you'd eat meat and you'd have enough protein, and then you wouldn't, so you kill the next deer. So there was a lot of cycling.
Well, when the Europeans colonized the New World and they encountered the indigenous populations averaged about 5 to 8 inches taller and were noticeably better conditioned. The experiment's been done.
I'm sorry. If you write down a question, I'll try to get that in, okay?
Can I get a word about nature of aging? It can be stopped and can be slowed down and can be reversed. I am author of theory of aging and it is supreme.
Okay,
I can answer your question if you answer.
I'll tell you what, if you just write your name down and give it to one of the people in the staff, I'll try to get it later, okay? I would want to continue our conversation up here. Michael, go ahead.
Right, so there are a lot of myths about what went on before agriculture, and you've enunciated one of them, and I think it's relatively well refuted.
I don't think so.
Thank you for that, by the way. I'm trying to understand, you know, this is going to take a longer period of time. Doesn't Aubrey's philosophy and the rest of these people, Judy and Lenny's philosophy, have some appeal in terms of the time frame we're talking about?
Well, not exactly.
Well, Aubrey's was a little...
Aubrey talks about 30 years.
Right, but
I'm
the other
talking
people-
about 3 hours.
3 hours.
3 hours. Over the next 3 hours, you can start the transition to a different trajectory of aging and an earlier cessation of aging, I propose. This is in the book. It's in the website. Get all the details there.
Okay.
Lenny?
The website's free.
No.
No charge required.
No, I was wondering, when are we going to get back to the science?
Okay. Well, we could start to do that. But I think, Michael, you know, there are people who, evolutionary biologists, feel like this. Michael represents a certain point of view, and it's interesting to hear this debate.
I'm going to definitely read your book. 'Cause I'm bursting with curiosity.
Just to warn the audience, the book is extremely painful. It's full of math and lots of experimental data, which
Lenny, you're
tests
welcome
the
to review
math.
it for my journal.
Less complicated than...
What?
I'm sorry. Oh, time. Okay. Judy, when do you have to leave soon?
In 2 minutes.
You're talking 10 minutes. We have 10
2
minutes.
minutes.
2 minutes. 2 minutes.
2
Got it.
minutes.
Thank you very much. Judy has to catch a plane, and she's got 2 minutes. I want to go back to you for a second then. You talked about these young cells in an older person, and I want to get you to explain that a little bit, because you say they have no control over it. We don't know what's going to happen. That seems to be some of the basis for Aubrey's thinking. How much does that hurt?
It's a part of it. So these experiments have been done. So a classic experiment is muscles don't heal as well in young people as they do in old people. So what you can do is you can take a young animal, a young mouse and an old mouse, and you can injure, so you take young, and you injure their muscles, and both of those muscles heal quickly. You take old, you hook the blood supply up together. I left that out. Take old, and you injure the muscles, and both muscles don't heal very well. So now you take a young mouse and an old mouse, and you hook up the circulation together, and you injure the young animal, and that young animal, then that muscle does not heal as well, and you injure the old animal, and the old muscle heals a little bit better. So there are things that are circulating that promote youthfulness and things that are circulating that inhibit youthfulness. And we need to understand what those things are. We don't know what they are. We have some candidates, but we really don't know what they
And
are.
the only thing that I would say that in any way differs from what Judy just said is that we can start from a very fundamental principle, which is that structure defines function. If we were able to turn the molecular and cellular composition of an older individual or an older animal back into how it was earlier in adulthood, then we would, if we did it completely, if we just could do it completely, then we would expect to see a consequent restoration of function and of remaining longevity. The only question then is how comprehensively do we need to do it? If we, for example, take a process that goes wrong during aging that causes another process that goes wrong, we only have to fix one of them. But if we don't know which of the two things causes the other, which is generally the case in aging, then we've still got a solution. We just fix them both. And we didn't need to know.
I'm sorry.
Before you leave, I have one quick question, because we're going to spend the rest of the time doing
Yes.
this. Do we want to live forever? Do we want to live this long a
Healthy?
time?
Healthy? Yeah, why not?
But that's really the key, right?
Yeah.
Is that you're not healthy.
Precisely. Yes.
All right. Judy
Thank
Campisi,
you.
thank you very much, Judy.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we're the all-boys club that are remaining. We have about 25 minutes left, and I want to take the time to talk about some of these more philosophical questions, unless you want to debate the science again, but we can continue to do that.
Well, the one thing we didn't talk about that I think is another major problem, and we talked a lot about the cancer, but I thought I would just mention.
Absolutely.
I think a really, really difficult problem is neurodegenerative diseases, and Alzheimer's disease in particular, but all of the neurodegenerative diseases. And I haven't seen anything really hopeful about how to approach this. And so if you really want to put your finger on something where we should be making an intense effort to do something about it, Alzheimer's disease would be where the focus should be. And it's difficult because these neurons, they don't divide, and they just accumulate damage. It's a one-way street, and there's not a good handle on what to do about it. We understand something about the process that occurs in families that have a gene that predisposes to early Alzheimer's disease, and that gives us some information about what's going wrong with the disease. But there's right now no really good strategy to deal with it, and the prevalence is very high in an aging population. It's up to a third to a half of people.
Specifically, it goes to your question, Aubrey.
Yeah.
Sure,
You
absolutely.
live for 1,000 years, but if you have
Certainly agree.
Alzheimer's for 920 of them, what do you do?
It would be completely pointless to fix up the rest of the body and not fix up the brain. Absolutely right. And Alzheimer's disease is, of course, the epidemic of the decade, certainly. So what do we do? Well, actually, it comes back to what I just said a moment ago. Alzheimer's disease is characterized by a number of different structural changes in the brain. There is a type of junk called senile plaques that accumulates in the spaces between neurons. There's another type of junk called tangles that accumulates inside neurons. And there's eventually, in late stages of Alzheimer's disease especially, there's quite a lot of death of neurons. So my philosophy would be we need to fix all of those things. We're getting pretty close to being able to fix the first of them, the elimination of the junk that accumulates in the spaces between cells. There's an approach using vaccination that's already in phase 3 clinical trials. But anyone who's looking at that and is expecting it to be a cure for Alzheimer's disease on its own is, well, very optimistic. I mean, it's conceivable that eliminating this stuff will have knock-on effects on the rest of Alzheimer's disease. But my money would be that that sort of approach will eventually be an essential component of a panel of interventions that really works against Alzheimer's, but that on its own it will be only marginally effective. And so the clinical outcomes that need to be measured in clinical trials for individual components of the therapy against aging in general or against Alzheimer's disease need to be very carefully specified.
Except that we have so underfunded research into Alzheimer's. It's one of the least funded diseases in this country.
Well, actually,
No, that's not true.
Oh,
I can tell you that.
you talk to the people in the Alzheimer's Association, and they may be biased, but they say that it's we're curing all these diseases and finding ways to treat them, and we are not dealing with Alzheimer's nearly as much as we can, and they say they're way underfunded.
It's certainly true that there is a very good case for putting lots more money into Alzheimer's research. However, if we want to compare it with the other diseases and disabilities of old age, then we also need to take into account all the things that are studied within our field, the basic biology of aging. The National Institute on Aging has a respectable budget, but it's much smaller than the budget of the National Cancer Institute, for example. And half of the budget for the National Institute on Aging, I think it's still half, isn't it, is specified, ring-fenced for Alzheimer's disease. Okay. Only about a sixth of the budget of the NIA is focused on the basic biology of aging. And let's face it, treatment for aging is preventative geriatrics. It is preventative medicine, as and when it comes into existence. It will be preventative medicine for the diseases and disabilities of old age, including Alzheimer's disease.
Yeah,
So
I mean, I would make 2 points on funding in this country. I don't think it's kept pace in the past decade, and it's lagging badly across the board for all diseases. I think that's one problem. Second problem is I think aging itself has not been given enough emphasis as a real trigger for all these other diseases, Alzheimer's, diabetes that we haven't talked about, cancer. And somehow there's got to be a way to figure out how to get more money into basic research
we've
on
got to
aging.
and I think I know one thing that we can do to make that happen. We've got to stop telling people aging is not a disease. We've got to start telling people the real true relationship between aging on the one hand and age-related diseases on the other, which I think can succinctly be stated as I just did, that treatment of aging would be preventative medicine against the age-related diseases. I'd be in favor of a division of preventative medicine in each of the age-related disease institutes. That would be a hell of a lot of money.
It
and
might
would
be
fun.
more than preventative. It might slow progression
Well,
after
that's right.
diagnosis.
That's
even.
right.
So
We have spent hundreds of billions of dollars fighting, looking for weapons of mass destruction in countries that didn't have them. It seems to me we have a few weapons of mass destruction here through this disease, the aging process. We're not funding them adequately. That's just my own opinion. 25 years ago, we wouldn't have been having this discussion. Right? This panel wouldn't have existed. 25 years from now, what will this panel look like? Will it be a little bit of what each of you is saying? Will be a lot. I know you're going to say, well, no, it's going to be my philosophy. But if you just relaxing, looking at the ceiling, staring at the stars, how much of each of what you're going to say is it going to be an amalgamation of all this? What's your wildest guess?
Well, I think by its very nature, science is unpredictable, and you just don't know. And so with regard to Aubrey's scenario, I'm not saying he's wrong. I'm saying there's no way of knowing. You just don't know. I mean, that's for those of us who really live this business, part of the excitement is you don't know when you walk into the laboratory whether there's going to be something completely out of the blue that you have to solve and that brings you in a direction you never suspected you were going. So you don't know. But what I do think, just projecting so there's this big unknown, okay? But putting that aside, taking what we do know now and projecting it, I think we will see drugs in 25 years based on basic research on aging that are a part of the toolkit against all the major diseases of aging. Alzheimer's, diabetes, cancer, osteoporosis, inflammatory diseases, and it will be what Aubrey just said about this idea that aging is somehow separate to diseases. That will be history, because what's going to cure that way of thinking is the fact that treating aging treats diseases. So that I would bet on. But I would also bet that there are going to be amazing things that we can't possibly predict now.
Michael?
Well, I have a completely different point of view, as both of these gentlemen know. And as far as I'm concerned, the game is over for conventional 20th century gerontology. It's dead. It's like Aristotelian physics. It got displaced by a completely different kind of physics, just as Einstein's physics replaced the Newtonian style of physics. I think we're now in a completely new scientific era with respect to aging research in terms of the actual science. And by actual science, I mean when scientists can, in fact, predict what's going to happen when they walk into the laboratory. My career has been based on planning experiments derived from formal mathematical theory, which then actually work every time. It's very unlike what you do in your lab, Lenny, when you truly
It's a
walk in and
different
don't know what's
paradigm.
going on. And in the
I wouldn't put it that way.
well, I'll just take you at your own words. I'll just accept your own words as you were saying them earlier. See, for evolutionary biologists going into experiments on aging, there aren't actually that many surprises because of a very powerful theory, which is articulated in the book Does Aging Stop? Available next week. But so for us, what we feel is really exciting is we now know that aging stops. We know how to manipulate it in the laboratory, and we're looking for ways to make human aging stop radically earlier, because right now when it stops, as Judy said correctly, we are in terrible condition. What we'd really like to do is to stop it in our 60s. And that's the project we're now working on. And for us, that is as straightforward as building atomic weapons was for the physicists of the 20th century.
Well, I agree with you. I'd like to stop this in our 60s too. My 60s, no
Can you
question
put a
about it.
time frame on it? If it's
Well, in
predictable?
some ways, people can start this experiment this evening. In other ways,
But how
actually,
do we know it's going to work?
well, we're doing experiments on this because in science, you have very general, powerful theories. You can test them anywhere you like, because if your theory is wrong, the experiment knocks out the theory. It's called falsification. And that's what scientists do.
I've heard that before.
Yeah, that's what scientists do. That's what I spent 35 years doing. That's what people in evolutionary genetics do. To us, the majority of the field of gerontological research is now a failed science. And it doesn't mean that the technological ideas that you've been talking about are wrong. There are many ideas that are generated by incorrect science that are correct. But if your model for what the sun is a gigantic chemical reaction, as opposed to E equals mc squared, you'll never find your way to nuclear power, among other applications and insights. You also won't find your way to a lot of the quantum mechanical principles that underlie modern-day electronics. But once you have modern physics, you can do amazing things. In the new gerontology, we'll be able to do truly amazing things, and we will, in fact, stop human aging much earlier. And when human aging is stopped much earlier, we will then take advantage of repair in exactly the paradigm technologically that Aubrey articulates, only then it will be vastly more powerful, because the repairable object you'll be working on will have stopped aging. And Aubrey's whole scenario will work vastly better
So there's
than
some
Aubrey now
agreement here,
imagines.
right, Aubrey? Is he agreeing with you ultimately?
I heaven forbid. Well, I want to really answer the question you asked about where we're going to
25
be
years.
25 years from now. And the big thing that I want to emphasize is the interaction between scientists and the rest of the world, the public, policymakers, opinion formers, and so on. I think that gerontologists have been not conspicuously better than other scientists at communicating the value of their work to the general public over past decades, but I think we're getting better at it. Partly, I think, because we're being allowed to get better at it. It's no longer quite so necessary to focus all the time on telling the public that we don't know, we don't know, we don't know. Certainly when scientists talk to each other, it's very important, and when scientists think about what experiments to do next, it's important to have a very good sense of what one doesn't know. But the general public want to know the best that they can, or they're going to make up their own opinions. So I take the view that even though our predictions for timeframes about the development of particular technologies and particular outcomes are extraordinarily speculative, we still have a responsibility to expound those predictions because otherwise the general public are going to make up their own predictions. And in the case of aging, that means they're going to take the view that nothing's ever going to happen, because that's the view that they will get from history. I think that that sort of over-pessimism on the part of the world in general will slow things down. It will dampen enthusiasm for getting more money into this field and so on. So I think we have to be, we have to communicate in a manner that doesn't come naturally to scientists in order to really get results here.
Let me ask you a couple of practical questions from a taxpayer point of view. When I was in college, the big political movement was zero population growth. We are now a world of 7 billion, expected to pass to 9 billion by the year 2050. What's going to happen if we stop dying at the normal rate of whatever is 100,000 people a day in the country or something. What's going to happen?
Well,
If all of a sudden,
there are two obvious things to say. Firstly, we will continue to die. We are just talking about the control of aging.
well,
So-
we live a lot longer, so
Well,
people will be born at a greater rate
the
than they're going
second
to
thing
die.
to say is that it's one of the few well-attested facts of sociology that the longer people are living, the less they reproduce. So in fact, it's in the European populations now, which have very long life expectancies, where in fact population is falling. In places like Italy and Japan and Germany, the actual indigenous population is falling.
As a
because-
percentage of
No,
the
in
population.
absolute numbers.
In absolute numbers.
In absolute numbers, because people are reproducing less. So in fact, if you want fewer people
Live longer.
have their lifespans extended, they will reproduce less.
Okay, on a personal note, do you agree with it?
Well, I do, but I don't think it solves the problem. I mean, I think you could ask, okay, if that's true, is that a good thing? Well, it's a good thing for us who are just sticking around for 1,000 years. Is it a good thing for the species to not
Oh,
have
screw
young
the
people?
species.
They agree again.
When people come to me
Isn't
with
that
questions,
throwing out the baby with the bathwater?
no. When people come to me with a question like, like, what about all these people that haven't been born yet that we will be denying the right to life? I have three questions
Oh, no,
as my answer.
I don't think that way at all. I just
And
think
no one
about-
asked that question.
Yeah.
We didn't ask that question.
Yeah, I think about just, I'm playing devil's advocate here, but I'm just saying that there is another side, that youth and, naivete, if you will, have a place in progress. And, are we trading off on that?
Well, I
That's
mean,
all I'm
you can
asking.
literally ask the Italians that question, so I don't know what their answer is, but you can literally ask it.
Let's talk about the personal question. Do you want to live forever? I mean, is there some, is part of life death, or have we just programmed ourselves sociologically to believe that?
So here's my answer to you. What time do you want to go to the toilet next Tuesday? Right. No, it's a stupid question, and you know why it's a stupid question. It's a stupid question.
I was going to answer it.
It's a stupid question because you know that you're going to have better information nearer the time.
Tuesday, when I have to go to the bathroom.
Right, exactly. All right. So it's the same deal. If we know that we don't want to die anytime soon, and we know that we are unlikely to change our mind about that while we stay healthy, then it's just forward planning. It's just saying, well, okay, let's stay healthy as long as we can, and let's stay alive while we're healthy. It's just forward planning.
Michael?
Well, I'm frequently asked this question, actually, especially by journalists like yourself. And my question is...
Predictable, I guess.
Okay, let's say somebody told you you were going to die on Saturday, but there's a pill you could take today that would mean you would not die on Saturday. Would you take that pill? Most people answer yes to that question.
Yeah, it's a slam dunk question.
There's one other perspective on this, I'm sure you guys know, is if people had a very, very long lifespan, there are issues that don't involve us, like global warming. And if people had a long lifespan, they might be more invested in solving long-term problems. And it might really facilitate people really taking a long view and thinking about the long-term problems.
Instead of the next quarter or the next 100 years, you think you'd be around for 500 years.
Or the next congressional election
Exactly.
in this country. Yeah.
Well, what's a Woody Allen line that eternity is a long time, especially near the end? And we would take a longer view of things, I think. Aubrey, I do have a couple of questions I want to ask you, because there have been some interesting things on the web about you. And I just want to say if it's true or not, that's all. You want to freeze your head? Is this true?
No, not at all. That's the second worst thing that could happen to me.
That would be second, right. But is that true? What was it? That was somewhere, that it came from something you said, right, somewhere.
I certainly believe that cryonics is a viable technology, if that's what you mean.
And does that mean you do not believe that your theories will come to pass within your lifetime?
It means that I don't know, just like Lenny.
Yeah. Is that optimistic? You would say that proves your point, right? To some degree?
I mean, it's very tough for the Aristotelians dealing with the Galileans and Newtonians. That's my point of view.
Well, you're statesman-like, I'll tell you that, right, Michael. Have you guys you've appeared together, is that true?
I've paired with Aubrey. I don't think we have,
I don't
Michael.
think Lenny and I have shared the stage.
Okay.
yet.
To sum up, if you could do this in a minute or 30 seconds, I mean, what have you not said that you really wanted to say? Because I don't want you laying, in bed tonight going, oh man, I wish I had said that. Is there one thing that you wanted to say that you didn't say?
I think research matters, and I ask everybody out there, if you care about this, to write your congressman, woman, and try to get more money into basic research, particularly basic research on aging.
Michael?
I should be clear that the people around me have said many things I agree with, and when I agree with them, I don't point it out. So
Now he tells us.
I've just focused on pointing out the things I specifically disagree with. They've said many, many things that no one who knows about aging could possibly disagree with.
Understood. Aubrey?
I want to say what Lenny said, but with a slightly different slant. I think that it is probably going to remain the case, as it is in almost the whole of politics, that public policy follows public opinion rather than leading public opinion, predominantly. And therefore, that, yes, writing to your congressman may help somewhat, but only if your congressman gets so many letters that they really think there are votes in it. Whereas, there are other sources of funding for this work that do not necessarily involve constituencies. So advocacy, getting the word out, talking to people who are wealthier than you, getting them to talk to people who are wealthier than them, getting money into this field from the general public, not just from the public purse, is also a very, very important way to go that I hope that some of you in the audience will be able to participate in.
However, if you're going to write to Congressman Anthony Weiner, I would say wait a week or so until this thing blows over. As someone who just today got injected some sort of lubricant in their knees because it seemed to work last year, I worry about things falling apart. David Byrne says that things fall apart, it's scientific, and I sort of believe that about my body. I hope all this stuff comes to pass. I mean, I think everyone feels like that. Your differences notwithstanding, I hope you're all right. And I hope we can, there's a pill, and I hope that we can keep reproducing as long as we can, and that's going to lengthen the lifespans of all of us. And I hope to see my children graduate college in 20 years. But in the meantime, I think the rest of us have to have a more realistic view of things and do those things that keep us healthy in the short run until the smarter scientists and researchers can figure out how we can just pop a pill or manipulate some molecules in DNA and do it for us. But I thank you for a lively discussion. Michael Rose, Judy, who had to leave, Lenny Garante, and Aubrey de Grey. I thank you so much for joining us, and I appreciate it very much.
That's great.
Aubrey, thank you.
Good.
Michael?